WBLS.com.
We are following developing protests in Seattle tonight that have reportedly turned violent at times. You are looking at live pictures from Seattle, where demonstrators are taking to the streets in solidarity with other demonstrators in Portland. According to our affiliate King 5 in Seattle, there have been a number of people arrested during what Seattle police refer to as a riot tonight, in which at least a few officers had been injured. They've been protesting for about 7 weeks now since the death of George Floyd and against police brutality. Now, those protests have escalated in the last few weeks as armed federal agents have gone in. They've been targeting protesters at the direction of the president. Meanwhile, at a protest in Louisville earlier today, things got a little chaotic when a gun accidentally went off. 3 people there were taken to the hospital after being hit. Now, police in Louisville said their injuries are not life-threatening and that all of them were members of the same protest group. That startling moment came as a group of far-right protesters faced off against Black Lives Matter protesters. But what you're looking at now are live pictures of protests in Seattle that are getting, it seems, increasingly intense and at times violent between police and protesters. Now, mercifully, things are calming down in downtown Louisville this hour. That does not mean that the calls and protests for justice for Breonna Taylor are calming down. That is the 26-year-old woman who was shot dead by police in her home back in March. To date, no one has been charged with her death, leading many people to continue asking when justice will be served. Let's put that question back to the panel. Susan Del Percio, Rashad Robinson, Ann Guerin, and Midwin Charles. Rashad, let me speak to you first. Yesterday, we talked to Kentucky's governor, Andy Beshear, about the Breonna Taylor case. Here's part of what he said.
Certainly, the investigation and the evaluation of this case has gone on far too long. And I think even those that are involved in that, which I'm not as a governor, would agree to that. I think one of the concerns is that there haven't necessarily been explanations of delay, of process, of where things are.
Rashad, what is your sense of how this case is going, particularly in terms of how much Governor Beshear knows and or is able to influence the case?
Well, when people say that the system is broken, they're wrong, because the system is operating exactly the way it was designed. The system has set up to shield and protect police, to allow police to do this type of sort of control, to participate in this type of violence, to kill with impunity, and to not actually have to face consequences. And what we are seeing is what we have seen in cities and municipalities around the country when Black people have been harmed and hurt by law enforcement, and we don't see justice served. What is happening now and what is different is people are taking to the streets and pushing back. We are not giving up. We are pushing back and making sure that we continue to expose the injustices. And we will hold people accountable, whether it's at Election Day or before. And so I do think that, what we are also seeing is the need for deeper structural reforms in terms of how police are shielded and allowed to continue this type of a violence without accountability.
As we're continuing to look at live pictures from Seattle, just a little more context as to what you're looking for from the Seattle Police Department's Twitter feed. According to the police, there was one officer hospitalized with a leg injury caused by an explosive. 2 other officers, according to the police department, were treated and returned to duty. Apparently, the crowd is throwing rocks, bottles, fireworks, and other explosives at officers. And just in the last 33 minutes or so, the Seattle PD says that 16 people have been arrested for assault on officers, obstruction, and for failure to disperse. We'll keep an eye on those protests in Seattle. But Midwin, let me ask you about Kentucky and what's going on in Louisville. I also asked Governor Beshear about appointing a special prosecutor. That's something that the Attorney General would have to do. Here is what the governor said.
I think a special prosecutor could make sense here. I'm not sure exactly where the Attorney General is on the evaluation of it, but if there are those that think that a special prosecutor would provide a more balanced approach, then that could be a direction the AG could take. I just think that a little bit of explanation by our Attorney General of the process itself, the steps that are being taken, and why it's taking so long would be helpful for people out there.
Now, Midwin, today, the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, tweeted, quote, "Those who are gathering in Louisville today to protest, we understand the desire for truth and ask that to be the focus of demonstrations, not violence. We continue to work diligently in pursuit of the truth by conducting an independent investigation into the death of Ms. Taylor." Midwin, I don't doubt that that's happening in the AG's office, but clearly that's not enough for protesters.
No, it's not. And I think when Governor Beshear says that he doesn't know the status of the investigation, I find that to be unacceptable. This is a very high-profile case. This is a case where a variety of facts are known. And it doesn't make any sense that even the governor is being kept in the dark, at least with respect to the status of the investigation. Justice delayed is justice denied. When justice is swift, or at least when there is the appearance that they are trying to make justice swift, what it does is it breeds credibility and it allows people to trust the system. Now, I know you asked him about a special prosecutor. I think that's a great idea, particularly in these kinds of cases, because when you appoint a special prosecutor in these sort of police killings of citizens, what it does is you have someone who is removed from the relationship with police and prosecutors, which we all know oftentimes they are in bed together. And by appointing a special prosecutor, you have someone who can come in and be independent, and the people can trust the process. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever that there's been so much delay with this case, particularly since we know that they entered without wearing body cameras. We know that when they filled out the incident report, they put down that there were no injuries, and Breonna Taylor is dead. Last I checked, that's an injury. So there are a lot of things that we do know, so it doesn't make any sense as to why we can at least get a status on this case.
Rashad, we've seen a number of pro athletes and even teams come out and speak about equal rights and about equal justice. Today, the WNBA at its home openers wore jerseys with Breonna Taylor's name on the back. The Tampa Bay Rays tweeted about justice for Ms. Taylor yesterday. LeBron James called for an arrest. What is your sense of the impact that pro sports may have on all of this, particularly as more, I mean, even Major League Baseball on opening day, players were taking a knee for the Black Lives Matter movement, the kind of thing that when I was in San Francisco watching Colin Kaepernick do his thing would have cost a guy his job.
Yeah, I mean, more and more athletes actually are reaching out to us at Color of Change and coaches and the leagues looking to not just think about saying Black Lives Matter, but moving beyond the statement. I think that that's incredibly important and powerful. These are local leaders in their communities. And as we think about sort of the reasons why we're not achieving justice, we can see the barriers that are standing in the way, whether it's the fraternal order police and police unions, which continue to not come to the table with any type of sort of real, ideas about changes. As we see the movements for both reform and for defunding, the movements for divesting from this type of policing and investing in communities in new ways, having cultural leaders, having those that sort of represent and have powerful places in society speaking out and pushing back. It also shows the power of cultural change that just a couple of years ago, right, the idea of athletes kneeling was completely sort of out of step. Now we're watching the leagues accept. That means we have to move to actual policy and structural change to combine with that.
Everyone, stay with us. We have a lot more to discuss. We're, of course, going to keep an eye on those protests in Seattle. Coming up this week.